Good evening, everybody. I think it's just about 6 o'clock, so we'll make a start. Welcome to Council Cabinet, Wednesday the 10th of October. We'll start the agenda. Apologies, Councillor Poulter and Councillor Grimmadell. Any other apologies? Sorry.
So, Sonia Sebastian, my Deputy Youth Mayor. She is studying for her exams at the moment.
Councillor Skelton, and I'm here instead.
Thank you very much. Item 2, late items. There are none. Receipt of petitions. Item 3, there are none. Item 4, identification of urgent items to which calling will not apply. There are none. Item 5, are there any declarations of interest? Okay.
Sorry, just to clarify legally, Glenn, with regards to my children, it's been noted historically with SEN, etc.
Thank you. Item 6, minutes of the meeting held on the 12th and 20th September 2018. Accepted. Okay. Matters referred. Item 7, recommendations from the Executive Scrutiny Board. As always, we'll take those on an item by item basis and deal with them as we deal with the various decisions. So we'll move on to item 8, which is referrals from council long-term waste contract. Glenn?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important in introducing this item that I make the point that part of my role as a statutory officer to this council, as monitoring officer, is to help make sure that the council makes rational decisions and does not make irrational decisions. And that's really, at the moment, what this recommendation to defer this decision is about. We are asking Cabinet to give respect to the decisions of Council, the Council resolutions, by actually waiting until there is adequate information in relation to taking any decision with regard to the long-term waste contract. We are not kicking it into the long grass, as was suggested at ESB last night. We are deferring it as a recommendation in order that necessary information can be available to Cabinet, upon which they can then make a rational decision. Now, in relation to that, there are a range of areas of advice I think that this council needs, both in relation to the technical update on where the facility is at the moment, and flowing from that there will be valuation issues and advice on valuation issues, advice on legal issues as well. And those streams of advice really need to come into Cabinet before they make any sensible decision on this issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before opening up to further debate then, I think the comment that I would make as Chair is to emphasise key words in the recommendation of the monitoring officer being to defer the decisions of full council to support the 2 motions to terminate the Synfin waste plant contract. You know, as a Cabinet, we will of course listen and we fully understand the constitutional and democratic importance of considering the decisions of full council, of all councillors, to support the 2 motions to terminate the contract, or those councillors that supported the motions. But at this time, we will support the recommendation to defer. That's what I'm going to be asking the Cabinet to do. Any decision at this stage until more technical, financial and legal information is provided, which will happen in the next couple of weeks. When we receive all of this information, we'll give it full consideration. And as I said last night at Exec Scrutiny Board, the offer is still on the table for all party leaders to be also briefed so they can offer their informed views and opinions moving forward. This is such an important decision for this council, probably one of the biggest decisions we will ever have to make. Party politics should not come into it. It's important that we make the right decision, and this Cabinet will make the right decision for Derby and the people that we serve. But we will do this only when we have all the facts and information in front of us to make that decision. Does anyone else wish to speak on this item? Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Chair.
So a few points. It was confirmed last night at executive scrutiny that RRS are in breach of contract and have been since the 1st of October, which gives us the right to terminate the contract. We haven't been given sufficient detail on what the financial and legal information expected, and we've been given detail on the technical detail that's required, but not on the financial and legal information and the time frame around those issues. And there is still no clarity that Cabinet has been given or anybody else has been given as to why these reports weren't ready earlier. And yes, the reports are important, and I acknowledge again what the monitoring officers said. I always acknowledge what the monitoring officers said, unlike the deputy leader. The reports are important, but actually what we need in this is political will. The full council motion, Cabinet, gives you a mandate to go to county and argue the case for termination. The reports, as they arrive, can follow up and will follow up afterwards and will back up this case. What we have to remember, Cabinet, is that RRS are in breach of contract, not the council. And if it were the other way round, would they be so lenient on us give us extra time in the same way? So I'm sorry, I disagree that deferring and waiting is doing nothing, and it is ignoring the mandate of full council, and it simply isn't good enough. This is an example of the few ruling the many and ignoring the will of the many and ignoring full council. And the irony of that, Chair, is that we currently operate an executive system, which means that as Cabinet you have the right to ignore a motion passed at full council, but you as an administration have said that you want to move towards a committee system. And if we had a committee system, then council would truly be sovereign and you wouldn't be able to overturn the decision of full council. And I see the irony in that you want to move to a situation where council is sovereign and that decisions that council make can't be ignored, and yet you are ignoring a decision of full council. And it's pretty hypocritical, to be honest, if you ask me. I think we also have to, and I have to say it again, last night was appalling that you, as Deputy Leader, Councillor Holmes, and the Cabinet member responsible for this portfolio, the first elected member through this whole process to release confidential information in the public domain. Nobody else has done that. We had a whole debate in full council where we were given the warning of the monitoring officer, which I absolutely respect, and we followed. And everybody managed to follow that and not release confidential information. And then you sat there in executive scrutiny, and in the first sentence you uttered, you released information that was on pink papers. And I just think, if you had any decency, Councillor Holmes, you would now resign. Because I don't agree that those debates should have been on pink papers and that information should have been on pink papers. But I respect the democratic decision that information was held on pink papers, and I would not breach that in any way, shape or forms. In terms of the joint leaders and getting briefings, I assure you I have had briefings from officers, so have other members of this group, because we, as a Labour group, are proactive in getting briefings from senior officers about a whole range of issues that are happening in the council, not just this. I am still waiting for a formal invitation to a joint group leaders meeting to talk about this. And as I said last night, you've had weeks to approach us on this. Nobody has approached us to sit down jointly as a group of leaders and talk about the issues. We had lots of nice words in May, didn't we, about working more collaboratively and a better political environment. But actually, this whole debacle has shown us that your intention is completely the opposite. You have no intention of working with other groups. You didn't even talk to the councillors in the ward where the plant is situated. You didn't talk to the wards that are going to be most impacted by the plant. And the only reason you want to reach out now is because you realise that you were too arrogant before and you assumed that you could just get this to sail through without any challenge. You completely underestimated the strength of feeling, both in the local area and amongst other councillors, about the plant. You didn't manage the political process. You couldn't persuade your coalition partners just to nod it through. And you couldn't even convince everyone in your own group to support you. So now we have a situation where you're down one because one of your Tory members has decided to resign and become an independent because of this issue, for whatever reason, and that's between you and your group. So your coalition is even less stable and more volatile, and the city is left with, very, very difficult situation in terms of leadership of the authority. So, rant over. Actually, the politics doesn't really matter, though, and you're right. This is much bigger than party politics, Councillor Holmes, and this is much bigger than party politics, I'd say, the rest of the Cabinet. What matters here is that people in Sinfin and Osmaston and Normanton are still having to put up with the dreadful stench from that plant. I'm told today that it was bad enough to be reported again to the Environment Agency. They still can't open their windows and they still can't sit in their gardens. They're still dealing with the flies, they're still dealing with the noise, and it's still keeping them awake at night. And they're still worried about the health impacts on themselves and future generations from whatever that plant is pumping out in terms of noxious gases. I'm obviously not an expert. Full Council gave you the chance to change that. That plant could be closed now. No more testing, no more stench, no more noise. And you have the chance to do that again tonight, to stop the noise, to stop the smell and protect the people in those communities. And I urge you, Cabinet, to respect the full will of Council, accept the recommendation of executive scrutiny for a second time that is coming to this body, and vote to terminate that contract immediately. And just to finish, because I do like a nice bit of irony, this was one of your election leaflets from the election in May. Labour's toxic legacy. There is growing anger and concern in Sinfin and Osmaston regarding the Sinfin waste incinerator on Sinfin Lane. Being allowed to be built and operated in such close proximity to residential areas at a cost of £25 million. But what are the other costs? Well, there you go. I'll just leave that there. Irony, hypocrisy from this administration and this Cabinet, absolutely disgraceful. You should support the will of full Council and adopt the recommendation for executive scrutiny.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. Can I start by saying that from what Councillor Eldridge just said, I hope she's beginning to see some of the advantages of returning to a committee system. Because I think the way debate went at full Council would have been different if Council could actually have made a difference. The other thing I'd mention is that while she may not have had an invite to a leader's briefing on this matter, she has had access to officers, and before, when it was a Labour administration, admittedly not under her leadership, it was actually really difficult to get briefings from officers. So I think that might show a change in attitude, even if it's not exactly what she wanted. But what I was going to ask for is, can I say I'm really pleased that you've said in a couple of weeks we're going to have more information. There are loads and loads of people out in the community who are really wanting more information. So what I would like is your assurance that as much as possible of that information, that financial, technical and legal information is actually provided so that as many people in this city who want to know can actually access that information and that all councillors can be given full details.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. The leader explained full Council that the reason for seeking the motion debate to be held in private session was to inform councillors, including yourselves, Councillor Kerr, Councillor Eldred, on the decisions that can and cannot be taken at this time, along with offering an insight and understanding into the very significant risks involved in this process. That specific detail needs to be fully understood by the Cabinet. Our approach is to ensure decisions are made based on being fully informed and being able to fully consider all the required detail to make the decision-making process sound. We do not currently have all of the detail we require, hence the recommendation to defer the acceptance of the motions. I think it'd be remiss of me not to remind the public and councillors that the Labour group have managed this issue and been responsible for it for the last 5 years, and ourselves dealing with it for the last 5 months. I think it's a point worth considering. And I'll reiterate what I said last night about my view that any administration, Labour, Conservative, or otherwise, would have to approach this issue at this time in this way. I don't believe it's credible to argue otherwise, and I absolutely stand by that belief. I think, Councillor Eldred, if you're suggesting, as it seems to me, that the situation were reversed, say, and you were the leader of this council, that you would at this moment terminate this contract, then in my opinion, you'd be demonstrating political recklessness of epic proportions.
Like disclosing confidential information in a public forum. Is that not political
you may wish
recklessness,
to
Councillor
continue
Holmes?
to politicise this issue, but it does not and will not change the approach that this council must take to move forward and make an informed decision. Cabinet, the recommendation in 2.1 is to defer any decision on the council resolutions until they can be considered alongside up-to-date and appropriate technical, financial and legal information. All those in favour?
Can we formally address the scrutiny rep?
Yes, sorry. Scrutiny Commission recommendations are noted. All in favour? Okay, thank you. Item 9. Mr Kinsley, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is following on from a Highway Policy and Framework and Strategy report that was presented at September Cabinet. The Highway Inspector's Manual will form the Council's primary defence against claims within the highway. Safety inspections are designed to ensure that the network is safe and free from defects as far as reasonably practicable, and this manual sets out appropriate response time based on risk and in accordance with local needs, context and priorities. Recommendations in this report are to review and approve the new safety inspection manual, and secondly, to delegate authority to the strategic director in conjunction with the cabinet member to maintain, develop and amend the manual as necessary. The reasons for these recommendations are that our current inspector's manual has helped the council achieve and maintain an excellent repudiation rate of 97% of claims that come in relating to the highway. This new document will allow that to continue with robust evidence. Secondly, recommendation 2 of 36 from the new National Code of Practice on Highway Maintenance promotes this approach, and that it is endorsed and documented at a senior level, hence bringing the report to Cabinet. The Department for Transport has recognised the good work completed on this to date, and they have also recognised that Derby is ahead of many other local authorities in terms of hitting the implementation of the new Highways Code of Practice, the deadline for which is this month. Derby have embraced opportunity and tools to manage the network as efficiently as possible. This in line with a sound asset management approach. It supports incentive funding and will help the council maintain its Band 3 status. Failure to maintain this will lead to a £184,000 reduction in our capital allocation. The main differences that will be seen from the new Inspector's Manual is that it will allow the service to deliver a much more proactive rather than reactive approach to highway maintenance, and we will see less temporary repairs carried out on the network and more right first time permanent repairs. So that's a very brief overview of the report and the recommendation, so happy to take questions now. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Smale indicated.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate some of the words that Mr Kinsey just said, especially regarding to the repudiation rate of any claims put forward to the City Council. I think that just shows how well our highways inspectors are inspecting our roads across the city. I just wanted to point out on the appendix that should be on the side of you, Appendix 2, with the Highway Safety Inspection Manual. I think it might be worth noting to councillors regarding to pages 17 and 18 and also 21. I just think that as councillors we do get requests regarding potholes and defects in our roads and pavements, but here it gives some greater understanding towards councillors about what defects are categorised and where they are repaired. So obviously you've got intervention levels, which are all, very much worthwhile looking at. And obviously on page 21 with the 9.3, we'll just show you what is required in terms of response time and what will be done to make a scenario particularly safe. Just to reiterate again that, I want to say thanks to all the highways inspectors and Dave's team for the hard work that they've put forward in the last year to produce this. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. And I know there are a lot of people who will be pleased to hear that statement of trying to get more things right first time. The patching of some of the more challenging potholes and then coming back and doing it later, I know causes people annoyance, and there's a feeling that there's a perception that it is less efficient. So moving in that direction will be good. I've got two comments though about this. One is sometimes the time between a defect appearing and it being corrected is not, even if it's a very serious defect, and there have been a couple in my ward recently which have just been little sinkholes appearing in footways, one of which was really quite exciting and about a foot across on quite a well-used footway. The other one was smaller, but again, a sinkhole quite deep, quite sudden. It can be the time it takes for somebody to see it and to be able to report it, because they don't know who to report to, and if they've got a phone number and it's outside hours, nobody's answering the phone, and they don't know whether they can leave a message, and maybe the message they leave isn't adequate. Nobody quite knows which phone messages are being picked up outside hours. I don't know either. I don't know if emails are picked up outside hours. So I think as part of this, we need to be clear as to how those serious defects can be reported to prevent something happening. And it might be a set of traffic lights on a major junction which aren't functioning, or it might be something less obvious like that sinkhole in the footway. So that's the first thing. And having had a very quick look at Appendix 2, which I've only just seen, I can't see it mentioned there, and it may be something we need to think about. The second point is regarding Recommendation 2.2. Already mentioned this evening that we are moving, hopefully, from cabinets to committees. And therefore, I think that to refer specifically in consultation with Cabinet member, if it's beyond the next 6 months or so, that isn't going to be a true statement. And I think maybe some slightly more general wording could be found to make that long-term correct rather than short-term correct. And the idea of amending the manual as necessary from time to time is, I think, particularly when we're only just adopting it, not sufficiently tight, because if we find in 6 months, 12 months' time that the number of claims that we're getting that we are not rebuffing goes up, then we may need to want to review this. So can I suggest that you look again at 2.2 and consider those 2 points? Thank you.
Councillor Smell.
Just to take your points on board, Councillor Kerr, yeah, I understand with regards to the reporting systems and the frustrations involved in those, and obviously they're all points that we'll take validly on board. Regards to 2.2, this is, you could say a live document that could be developed and amended. I'd like to hope and think that this document can be taken to the next Community Scrutiny Review Board, where they can scrutinise this document there and then, and should they think that there is items for recommendation or possibly items that need amended, then they can, I'll be more than happy for them to, to scrutinise through the board system, but also to obviously come and speak to myself or even to Dave and Cully. I'm sure they'll be open to any other ideas in amendments towards this manual. It's no problem. Thank you.
Mr. Kinsley.
Thanks, Chair. If I can just pick up on the point about out-of-hours emergencies. We do have a well-publicised Street Pride phone number, and if you call that out of hours, there is the option to be put through to the 24/7 Highways Duty Officer, who will take details and, if deemed necessary, will arrange for dangerous defects out of hours to be made safe within a couple of hours in most cases.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I will just, in reply to your comments on 2.2 in terms of, crystal ball really, in terms of future governance. The problem is we don't actually know what the makeup of that future governance is going to be. So I think, whilst I accept what you're saying and it is worthwhile horizon scanning on certain things, in terms of a decision for Cabinet, I think we have to deal with the here and now really. But I do take on board what you're saying, but I don't think it's appropriate to actually change the wording on it. Councillor Eldred.
I think what he was saying, Lucy, is you can expect a U-turn very soon. And I'm very sorry that if the most exciting thing that happens in Littleover is sinkholes appearing in the footways, I'd encourage you to come and hang out in Darley, where we have lots of exciting things happening that aren't about sinkholes in the footways.
But I'm going to ask you a question, Chair, because I asked the leader this at the last meeting, but he said it wasn't relevant and wouldn't answer. So I'll have a crack and see if you fancy answering it, because I think it's very, very relevant. In terms of our highways and footways, we have a massive problem in that in order to get our highways and footways up to an acceptable standard, we would require at this point somewhere in the range of £20 million worth of capital investment, and then around £4.9 million annually of investment in terms of repairs and maintenance. Obviously, the amount that we get from government, my understanding, is around about £2 million a year, so it's obviously a lot less than that. So my question is, if we carry on in this way, sitting here and talking about repairs and timing of repairs is going to be a moot point, really, because the whole system will collapse within the fullness of time. So I'm just wondering what your plan is around that as an administration to plug that gap, essentially, or fill that sinkhole, Councillor Holmes.
Ever thus, under Labour governments, under coalition governments, under the current Conservative government, it's always been an issue for local authorities to deal with the requirements of the highways network. Even before I was elected, pavements were an issue, campaigning in my own ward, and it's always the same. I've actually seen improvements across the city in recent years due to the government giving us extra funding, say for pothole repairs after the winter periods. There is funding coming through. We'll seek more funding. We will always lobby government for more funding, but it's an issue which is being taken forward. I don't see that there's going to be any massive change moving forward either. It's always going to be a struggle. It's as simple as that, but we're going to be seeking as much funding as we can. This is a step in the right direction in proactive repair as well, and we are determined to see improvements across the city of our roads and pavements. Are there any more contributions? No? Okay, so recommendations 2.1, 2.2, are we agreed? Okay, there was scrutiny, by the way. It was to note the report. Item 10, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. By means of introduction, this consultation is the most significant and far-reaching one the Council has ever carried out in the area of SEND, Special Educational Needs and Disabilities, and it has been a requirement of the Department for Education for all local authorities to undertake a review of its specialist provision as part of the SEND reforms which were introduced by the 2014 Children and Families Act. We worked very hard to ensure that the consultation was extensive and fair, and we received 425 responses, which have all been carefully grouped and analysed. I just wanted to make three key messages, if I may, just to set this consultation into an important context. The first is that implementation is very much evolution, not revolution, and no existing placements will be affected by the proposals. And subject to Cabinet approval tonight, implementation of the proposals will take place on a phased basis with appropriate transitional planning and in some cases subject to further statutory consultation. Secondly, there is no overall reduction in levels of funding, and in fact, some of the proposals are underpinned by capital and revenue investment. And thirdly, the overall aim is to ensure that children attend the most appropriate school to meet their needs, local to them, within a context of ensuring we have sufficient local school places at both enhanced resource and specialist provision, and to reduce the high numbers of education, health and care plans that we have in Derby, and of children being placed out of area far away from where they live. The report is very detailed, and I think it's fair to say there was really purposeful and extensive scrutiny at last night's executive scrutiny meeting. The main proposals in the report relate to four key areas. One, enhanced resource schools and special school placement criteria. Secondly, ensuring specialist provision is relevant to current needs of children and young people in Derby. Thirdly, improving SEND pupil pathways between primary and secondary enhanced resource schools. And fourthly, developing an early years inclusion fund for all early years providers. The recommendations to Cabinet are listed at 2.1, 2.7. But it's also worth noting at this point that there were a number of recommendations made by exec scrutiny following a really good debate at the meeting.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr Smith, for introducing that. This is a comprehensive review, and as Andy has said, it's the first one for a large number of years, and one of the things I want to give assurances to both Cabinet and to the rest of Council is that we won't be waiting another 30 years to do this review again. We will keep it on constant review because it is an ever-changing field. We did have a very good scrutiny meeting last night, which I was invited to, and thank you to Scrutiny for allowing me to address the Scrutiny Commission last night. There were a number of recommendations sent to Scrutiny, and we have also received a letter today from Councillor Eldred. If it's okay with you, Chair, do you want me to take those Scrutiny recommendations now and my responses to them? Okay, so the first executive scrutiny recommendation was to recognise the vital importance of early years intervention, and absolutely I fully accept that first recommendation. The second recommendation was that Council Cabinet should not decommission enhanced resource places at Central and Lord nurseries, but should instead formalise the commissioning of these places at early years, including supporting SEND children. I do not support this recommendation. It's important to ensure inclusion in all early years settings across the city, as many early years settings support children with SEND, and the actual proposals in the report are all about inclusivity. The third recommendation is to recommend that Council Cabinet should ensure there is an assessment unit to lead and inform early years intervention. In terms of assessment, this is really part of the Educational Healthcare Plan assessment process and as part of the SEND reforms, and does not require separate assessment units, and therefore I would not support this recommendation. The fourth recommendation was that Council Cabinet should ensure clarity of pupil pathways from early years to primary places. Early years children are, of course, at a developmental stage of their lives, and as the process of healthcare checks proceed, and any needs may be emerging or may simply be a part of a child's natural growth and development process, and are not necessarily special needs that require an EHCP assessment or plan. It is worth noting that currently there are only 4 children with EHCPs in nursery schools in Derby, and I do not support this recommendation. Recommendation number 5 recommends that Council Cabinet should increase resource and provide funding for Central and Lord nurseries to enable them to become centres of excellence that can provide support for other settings to promote inclusion. I do note this recommendation, however, it is important that all nursery schools have the opportunity to receive early years inclusion funding, and we should be striving for all settings to be centres of excellence. The report highlights that there are other nursery schools who also have similar numbers of children with SEND needs, and the recommendations make this more equal and inclusive to all, so I do not support this recommendation. Recommendation number 6 was to recommend that Council Cabinet should increase resource and provide funding for Brackensdale Infant School to enable it to become a centre of excellence that can, primary school, and should provide support for other settings to promote inclusion. The SEND proposals provide clarity for the school and parents in relation to commissioned enhanced resource places, and it's also important for all schools to share their expertise in relation to SEND and other methods of working in an inclusive way. I therefore do not support this recommendation. And then the final recommendation was that Council Cabinet that any money saved from the proposal should be reinvested in SEND provision and made available citywide to enhance resource. There are no saving proposals in this review. However, if any funding should become available, I would look to reinvest into SEND provision in the city, so I would note that recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Eldred.
Thank you, Chair. I think to start by saying that I certainly, and we as a Labour Group certainly support aspects of this report. We absolutely support the principle of inclusion and support the aspiration of having young people in mainstream settings wherever possible and supporting mainstream settings to be able to support those children. We also support the principle of having clear pathways for the educational journey of young people with SEND and support parents being able to choose where their children go so they're not restricted in terms of the setting that their children can attend. But I think we have to also bear in mind the reality of the situation, and there are clearly aspects of the early years proposals that need to be looked at. And fundamentally, aspects of the early years proposals that I disagree with and that Labour Group disagree with. And I just kind of think it's worth saying that I've come to this view, and other Labour colleagues have come to this view, not out of nowhere. We've been engaging with early years settings since the start of this consultation. I was chair of the Children and Young Persons Committee last year. I'm also lucky to have 2 local authority nurseries in the ward that I represent, in Darley Ward, one of which is Central Nursery, which is referenced in this report. We've read all of the consultation responses from the consultation that was conducted, and I did that in my role as the chair of the Children and Young Persons Committee. We've had extensive briefings from officers, and I've also talked to parents whose children have attended in particular Central Nursery and heard about their experiences of children in that setting. So I think it's fair to say that my view, Chair, is an informed view, although I'd never profess to be an expert in early years. Just because I have twins, I don't claim that that makes me an expert in early years. But I have, spent a long time around this subject. I think, in my opinion, the proposal to decommission the enhanced resource school places at Central and Lord Street Nursery and move funding from these settings is simply wrong. It's a bad decision, which is backed up by the responses in the consultation and the feedback that we have had from those settings and from early years practitioners. Both Central and Lord Nurseries employ dedicated and highly trained specialist SEND staff with years of experience who do an amazing job. It's clear whenever I meet the staff that they're passionate about early years education and all the children that they support, regardless of their needs. Central Nursery, which is the one that I know best, is a well-respected and loved nursery which has just celebrated its 80th birthday. So it's something of an institution in Derby. And I think we should be really concerned, Chair, that this knowledge and experience and expertise will be lost if funding to these schools is cut, because they simply won't be able to retain the level of staff and the level of expertise that they have now. Staff in these schools are able to support existing needs of children who come into their care. They're identifying emerging needs, particularly amongst 2- and 3-year-olds. It may be the first time that those needs have been identified. But also, crucially, they're able to determine the level of support that these children need and require in order to help them thrive, whether or not they go on to eventually have an EHCP or not. And I'm not a critic of PVI nurseries, of private and voluntary sector nurseries. All of my kids have been in private nurseries. We have excellent provision across the city. There is no doubt about that. But it's clear, and it was clear from the questions that were asked to officers last night, that we don't know whether or not all the settings across the city, and there's somewhere in the region of 400 nurseries across the city, have the expertise and the knowledge and the experience either to identify the needs that children have coming into their setting, or provide the support that they require, or identify even what support they need. And it's not clear to me in these proposals how the PVI sector would access that support in order for them to be able to make those assessments and actually provide the right support for those children. Which is why the recommendation about creating centres of excellence at Lord and Central who have that expertise is actually really quite key. And I also support the recommendation around Brackensdale. So the Camlet report sets out clear pathways for young people moving from primary to secondary, which again, this is great and we fully support this, it's really important, but doesn't do that for children at primary, for moving from early years to primary stage, which doesn't make sense. Not only does it not make sense, it could leave some children unable to access the appropriate setting to meet their needs. If these proposals are adopted as they are written, it will mean that there is enhanced resource support in place at every stage of the education process except early years, which is not only discriminatory against children under the age of 5, but fails to recognise the significant and increasing need for specialist support amongst children at this age. Additionally, unlike primary and secondary schools, nursery schools and PVI nursery settings do not have notional funding built into their base budgets, as their funding formula is very different. That means that those settings will be unable to provide upfront support to children who enter their care, and those children will have to wait until funding from the Early Years Inclusion Fund becomes available, which could cause significant delays. And if you think about the fact that in a nursery setting, some 3-year-olds will enter that setting, a preschool setting, and will only be there for 3 terms. So what is the length of delay we're looking at? You may not be in a situation where it may take a term to identify the support, a term to access support, and then by the before you know it, they're gone. And not only that is that a problem because they can't access the support, but they then may not have an EHCP in place if they need that. And if they don't have that plan in place, they can't then get a place at a special school should they need a place at a special school. So you're actually talking about then a significant delay in the support that they need and putting barriers in place to them being able to access the right setting further on. Sorry, I get quite emotional about this because I think it's really important. I think it's also really key to note that under the Early Years Inclusion Fund, the rate of pay that will be available to early years settings, whether or not it's a PVI setting or a local authority nursery, is £10 an hour. Now, in a local authority nursery setting, obviously, the staff who work in those nurseries are bound by the collective agreement for local authority staff, which means that teaching assistants are paid between £11 an hour and £16 an hour. And those nurseries are going to have to make up that shortfall because they will only be able to access £10 an hour from the Early Years Inclusion Fund, and that will put additional pressure on their budgets. So I think, it's widely acknowledged, Chair, that early intervention and identification of needs is key in developing the right support for young people with SEND. And I believe that these proposals will make it more difficult for this early intervention and support to happen, placing our young people with SEND at a significant disadvantage at the early years stage. And in fact, I fail to see how these proposals, particularly the early years, not the whole proposals, I'm not saying, can meet the principles set out in the SEND Code of Practice about meeting need and intervening at an early stage. So I would urge you to reconsider as a Cabinet and take on board the recommendations from executive scrutiny. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. The principles that we're talking about here, that every child is an individual and needs to have the education that is suited to them at that point in their life, is absolutely vital and clearly underpins everything. The question really is how we deliver it and what changes are needed from what we have now, which we know is imperfect, and I don't think there will ever be a perfect system because we don't live in a perfect world. But we need to move towards the ideal. A lot of the recommendations here are still talking about feasibility studies, about scoping of initial proposals, are subject to approval. There's a lot of things where this report is taking a path but is not saying where we are going. But what it does lack is a statement at the end to say when we're going to have those next stages back. And I would think to have a recommendation 2.8, which in some way is saying we're going to come back to this and we're going to firm up some of these ideas at, I don't know when, somebody here, officer or cabinet member might say whether this ought to be next term or whether it ought to be in 6 months' time. But I think we do need to have, a lot of the things here are still very vague, and it needs to go back through scrutiny, and it needs to come back here. So I'd hope that you can put some sort of time frame onto that. This report also is not pulling out the vital importance of training. It mentions it in passing, but we don't know where all the resources are coming from in terms of to free up the time and in mainstream schools and the expertise in mainstream schools to be bringing this sort of training in on top of all the other training which they are already doing. And yes, you can argue that all schools ought to be up to speed on this, and therefore it's just a bit of top-up, but we know in practice, if we are going to have more children included in mainstream settings, there is going to be a significant additional training required. And having your Senko go elsewhere to do some training has a real cost to it. And the school may not be prioritising that in the way it ought to. So we need to make sure that there is actually a recommendation here in terms of resources going into schools to facilitate that. Sometimes schools need a bit of a carrot as well as a stick to do what is right. And that funding to enable some of that training to go on, I think would be very helpful. There's within the background papers for this, and I appreciate the background papers because there is more information here than there was in the consultation that went to scrutiny a year ago, and that is helpful. And within there is talk about the link between that exclusions are disproportionately happening to children with special needs. And that is something that we need to monitor really, really carefully because that is a double whammy for that child. So if nothing else, we need to be bringing back information as to what impact that is having and what the statistics look like on that as this moves along the road. Looking at those papers in the background, there is, and for example, on the page 31 of the JSNA and page 89, there are statements about the number of children we have with special educational needs in primary and secondary. And we know that there are more children who have statements when they get to secondary school saying that, you know, year 6 is a key year as they're about to enter secondary school. So why are we, I can't see the justification in the numbers here for the change for St Clair's. And I can't see the clear rationale for why we need to have fewer secondary places compared to primary places. Equal numbers is not what we experience in practice. And I'm concerned that we will end up with more children being excluded in the secondary phase because we haven't got suitable places for them to be learning. And again, I haven't had the depth of briefings that obviously the camp member and the staff have, but I think we need to be really, really mindful of that. Another concern I have is for our special schools, and in paragraph 4.79 on page 20, there's a comment about in the unlikely event that an enhanced resource school or special school should refuse to take a pupil whose needs can be effectively met there, the council may direct the school to admit the pupil. Now, who is in the best position to judge whether a pupil's needs can be met at that school? And I would say it's probably that school or that enhanced resource unit. If there is a requirement for that child to go to that school or that enhanced resource unit, and the school is unable to manage that child's behaviour, and there is injury to that child or another pupil or a member of staff, who is going to be liable? I am really concerned about that, and I would like some reassurance. And the other thing, as I was going to mention, is the SEND fund bandings, which are mentioned in passing. And I think we're a bit of a heavy hammer to crack a problem. We've only been operating them for, a term and a half? It's probably early days. But I think it would be really useful to have some feedback on how those new bandings are going, how schools are managing within that sort of funding, and whether they are already beginning to see problems that the taper that's going in for those who are losing funding, whether there's going to be issues. Because there's going to be a real disincentive for special schools to prepare a pupil for going back into the mainstream, who's going to be going from a child who is not going to require so much intervention and to be opening up the opportunity to take an empty space for a child who will going to need far more. So I think we need to look at the bandings and how they are working in practice. Quite a lot of points there. I appreciate I had a briefing. I've read the paper since then, and maybe some of those thoughts can be taken on board.
Councillor Rawson, did you want to contribute? Okay.
So many of you will know already that I'm probably the biggest critique and person who questions the majority of this. And for those that don't know, I have 3 children, 2 with special educational needs. And I've had the privilege and disprivilege, if you like, of going through this process twice. And we've had some fantastic experiences with fantastic mainstreams and not so fantastic experiences where things haven't gone to plan. And I think so I speak to say that from my point of view, I totally appreciate the need to get this right moving forward. And yes, if I had a magic wand that could give me millions and millions and millions of pounds, I would have a specialist provision in every class, a specialist teacher in every class, and everything else. But we have to be realistic, and I think it's about getting the need and the balance right for this council going forward. And it's changed for me, it's changing that dynamic now to supporting the parents, to challenging the schools and getting things right for our children. And from a point of view, there's a number of points I want to touch on, but from the nursery point of view, I totally get where Lisa's coming from with the specialisms. I've got all the respect in the world. I live 24/7 with children with SEND, and I need a break, so I've got all the respect for the TAs that work with those children and the specialist needs that they have. What I would say is that within those 2 settings, identified are 36, am I correct? No, my apologies. Yes, 36 children that have this SEND need, and they have a substantial amount of the funding. Now, across the city, if we look for 4.56, there are 133 children. There are far more children in other settings that aren't getting that support as much as possible. And I want to see those specialist teachers being utilised everywhere across the city, and there is a need for it, and we don't shout about what we are doing and what we're doing well. You know, there are operational things that happen from the social care teams, from the OTs and everything else that does happen across the city, and the early interventions teams that do go out to schools, and the opportunity areas funding that goes alongside. There are opportunities, and I think we need to build on that. And my challenge to Lisa is that, do you think it's fair that it's for the few, those 26, and not the many? Because the reality is there's 133 that we've identified. Now, if those specialisms and those TAs were more informed, we could identify more at an earlier stage. And at that early stage, getting that early intervention is key to getting the support that those children need. I've been through the process where I've had a child who's failed a mainstream setting because of lack of early intervention, and I've got a child who, with the right early intervention, is currently in a mainstream school and managing well. Now, I know every child is different. I've seen that with my own 2 children. They're like chalk and cheese, and yet they have similar diagnoses. And I think it's very clear to me that we have to operate on a one-to-one. And I challenge every day, and Yvonne knows, and Andy knows, that I will be sitting there saying, we need to look at this dynamically, we need to look at it every month. What are the numbers? What are the changes? Is this enough? And it's a budget at the end of the day, and if a need arises, then we have to look at it, and that's the way we need to approach it going forward. So I'm extremely passionate about it. There's lots of things that, you know, I questions and challenge, and it's emotive for me completely, and I saw things very differently and see things from different sides now that I'm getting facts and figures and numbers and everything else. And as I said before, yes, if I had a magic wand, but what we have to do is look at how we can support the majority and those, and identify as early as we can, and it needs to be an ongoing look at it. And like Yvonne said, not every 30 years, it's every year. We need to analyse where we're at as a city and progress going forward. But my honest and true respects go to all of those special educational needs teachers. I couldn't live without them taking on the challenges that they face with my children. So I just wanted to say that, really, and the fact that, please be assured that we will challenge. I am the biggest critic of our own administration, so please be aware of that.
Where is the plan for the training?
Sorry, thank you very much. That's a very good point. The training, I challenge this regularly, and I know, and I've often asked, and there has been significant SENCO training regularly within our schools now to empower our SENCOs to be able to challenge for this, the funding, and to say, look, you don't necessarily need that educational healthcare plan. You can apply for these provisions of fundings going forward, and that's where we need to be. It's not the be all and end all, and I've been there, I've had that fight. It's about making sure that those children children get the support that they need. I don't need a piece of paper. Yes, I have needed that piece of paper, absolutely. But it's not about that. It's about you guys from the TAs who are able to give those children that support with that additional funding. Now, if you've got that funding when you need it at the right point, for the right children at the right time, it will make a massive difference and we'll see a shift. Yes, it's going to be a shift and it's going to be done over a period of time, but I truly believe that there'll be a realignment of where children are supported better earlier and then have less mental health concerns, bigger long-term impacts. And as much as I was the biggest critic of it and scared of it, and that's what it is, it's scared as a parent as to what's going to happen and how, I can start to see the unfolding of the plan to get that in line and to get those placements for children at the right points, at the right times, and support our TAs to do that.
That's training for schools, though. What about training for the private sector, which there are?
And that's the private sector. I can't comment on the private sector. And from my point of view...
Councillor Wilson, I think Councillor Williams would like to contribute, if that's all right.
Go for that one.
Thank you very much. There's a number of questions there, and I'll try and answer those as we go along. In terms of other settings that are supporting, that the other settings are supporting this proposal, and I do believe that this is readdressing the inequality. There are indeed practitioners in other settings, whether it's maintained or PVI, who do hold the competence and the experience. Again, back to this is evolution and not revolution. The criteria, etc., is being worked up, Lucy. And the dates for detailed implementation is actually the next phase for some of those recommendations that you talk about. So I could not give you, for each of those, an exact date now when that will happen. But as soon as we know those, obviously we will communicate those. In terms of SENCO training, there has been ongoing SENCO training, and there has been ongoing training to the graduated response. We are also very fortunate in that we have had some funding from the government for opportunity areas, and as part of that I'd like to say thank you to the Opportunity Area Board, because they have looked at and are helping with the SENCO training, and have also recently commissioned peer reviews for SEND peer reviews across the city. So again, that should give some comfort and some support to those schools that need that peer challenge and that peer review. And again, Lucy, if you'd like to have a discussion about the training that is ongoing, I'm happy to do that outside of the meeting. I also would like to draw your attention to the revised in-year access policy. This has now got a more robust approach to exclusions and to inclusions, and again is holding the schools much more to account. Again, happy to bring a report further down the line to show how that has had an impact. And in terms of the banding, again, Lucy, yeah, absolutely right. We're not fully advanced enough to know whether that is having that impact. And again, I'm fully happy to bring a future report to Cabinet to identify what the schools are saying and how it is working. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring you in a second. Youth Mayor, sorry, I forgot you, so if you'd like to contribute.
Yeah, almost forgot me. Thank you, Chair. As you can imagine, being the Youth Mayor, as you just mentioned, I do have a lot to say, but I will try to keep it to the script. So having discussed this report, young people have welcomed the improvements and extra placements extra placements arising from this report, and we welcome that the stepping stone of this report will not be interpreted as a solution. Though through my years of being a member of Voices in Action, we have always said in consultation or otherwise, SEND young people must be given the support they need, but not segregated to a specialized school. In short, they should have the help they need wherever they are.
So as you can imagine, even though we are adding places to schools, which is what we want and, to be fair, what we need, they are being added to schools with existing places, no matter how great. And I, being an ex-student of one of them, know how good they are. Young people would want, in addition to the enhancements detailed in this report, a focus on providing support at every level, not just specialized schools, and an acceptance that every teacher is a SEND teacher. Actually, a great example of that last point happened just today, relating also to the communication strategy mentioned yesterday at executive scrutiny, where we sat through a presentation on mental health and SEND, receiving abominable feedback. I questioned why our Voices in Action consultation on this exact problem seemed to have been gone nowhere. We have suggested improvements on the deficiencies detailed in that feedback.
Thank you. Councillor Eldred?
Yeah, I think some of Councillor Rawson's comments, I appreciate her experience, were a little bit misleading. We're not talking about the difference between only 2 nursery settings across the city getting support and no other nursery settings getting support for children with SEND. PVI settings can already access support for children and young people in their care who have SEND. That is the case now. There isn't no support, there is support. And actually, if you look across the city, the number of children who are receiving support who are identified as SEND across primary and secondary in mainstream schools is also vastly higher than those who are in enhanced resource units, but we recognise the need to have both. We recognise the need to have support in mainstream settings at primary and secondary level, and we recognise the need to have enhanced resource support where that is appropriate as well. And all we're saying is that same should apply at early years, that we recognise the need to have support in mainstream settings and enhance resource to support to what there is now. There is support available, but that absolutely should be enhanced through the Early Years Inclusion Fund, but that should not be at the expense of having an enhanced resource support as well for those children where that is appropriate, in the same way as we have for primary and secondary. We should not discriminate against children under the age of 5 and not have enhanced resource support where that is required and needed. That's all we're saying. And I think, to be fair to what Councillor Williams was saying, that actually I asked the question at executive scrutiny last night of the officers, what level of knowledge do we have about the level of qualification, experience and expertise in the private sector, in PVI settings and PVI nurseries across the city, in terms of their ability to identify need, assess need and provide support? And the answer was, we don't know. So we don't have a clear picture. We couldn't probably have a clear picture of what's going on across 400 plus nurseries in the city. So yes, there will be settings out there that do have absolutely excellent provision, but we do not have a clear picture of what is going on across those settings. And I don't think we have enough of a clear picture to remove enhanced resource support from the early years setting and say that everybody can access one pot of money. That's the...
Are there any more contributions? Okay. Oh, no? Okay, thank you very much for those contributions. It was a debate which clearly many of us are very passionate about, and I have every confidence in the Cabinet member responsible and the Cabinet collectively to take this forward and evolve. That's the message here, is that this is evolution, not revolution, and I think this is an excellent report. We have to note, as Councillor Williams said about the scrutiny commissions, that item 1, yes, we accept that. Recommendation 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 we won't be supporting, and item 7 in the scrutiny recommendation is noted.
Chair, is it not customary to allow your Cabinet members to vote on the recommendations from scrutiny rather than just tell them what they're doing?
No, I'm suggesting what I'm asking them to vote on, Councillor Eldred. I'm detailing what we're proposing to do, what I propose to put forward as chair.
But they didn't vote on them on the other items either, Chair.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, so With that noted on the scrutiny recommendations, we are here to agree recommendations 2.1 to 2.7. All agreed? Thank you. Okay. Item 11. Mr. Smith again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this paper on the graduated response links very much to the SEND review, since the graduated response strategy will provide support and clarity to mainstream schools on accommodating pupils with SEND needs. The purpose is to get Cabinet approval on the graduated response strategy, which is part of our overall approach to inclusion. The overall strategic objective of the strategy is for children to have their needs met through mainstream provision wherever possible, and schools must implement different types of approaches in the first instance before we will consider undertaking an an education health needs assessment, and schools will need to be able to show how they've done this. The graduated response has been developed with partners across schools, health and social care, and included involvement from our Parent Carer Together Forum, all involved in the development, and was piloted before rolling out at the beginning of this academic year. So Cabinet are asked to agree the recommendations listed at 2.1 and 2.2.
Are there any contributions? Councillor Kerr?
Thank you. Could I just have clarity on Appendix 3? It refers to October 2017. Is this actually been sitting around in draft for a year, or should it say 2018? In that it's being approved. But my greater concern here is the ability of mainstream schools to accommodate children with special educational needs is not just dependent on the training, experience and expertise of the staff and the sometimes in some cases the style and quality of the buildings, but it also is very dependent on the behaviour and acceptance of their peers, the rest of the children at the school and the pupils in that school. As a result of this consultation, these papers, I've received an email from somebody who pointed out, it was very interesting the way she pointed out her child's experience and also her non-special needs child's interpretation of her sister's experience at school, and said that one of the challenges is that if you feel different at school, then you start to feel different at school and you feel alienated and isolated and don't fit in. And that can be simple as having somebody else with you to support you in class. Why is it always that child who gets the support in class? Oh, she's the one who needs help. He's the one who needs help. And that makes you stand out as different. And that's an interesting problem because schools are having to monitor how much time they are giving that TA to support that child, because that is expected as part of their EHCP. But by dedicating that child, that support to that child, you're also making that child stand out as different. If we've got a teaching assistant who does floating around different people, but may spend a lot of their time with that particular child, it may make that child feel less different. And I don't think we can solve that problem here, but I think from a child's perception and from the other children in the class and their perception, we may have an issue that we need to examine in more detail. So it's the ethos of the whole pupil body and their acceptance and inclusion and their wish to be an inclusive pupil body, which is as important as the teaching and experience of the staff. We haven't talked about that as far as I'm aware. It doesn't seem to be included in this paper. It may challenge schools because it may put the social interaction of their pupils above the ability of those pupils to pass exams and challenge and go through their SATs. So I think it's something we probably can't answer now, but I think it's something that very seriously we need to address, we need to talk about, we need to learn about as part of a move for pupils, more pupils with SEN to remain in the mainstream. Thank you.
Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just in terms of the date on the strategy, this was piloted initially across some of our schools, hence why it says October 2017. So subject to the Cabinet decision, we need to remove the word draft and put October 2018 on it, so thank you for pointing that out, Lucy. The other point you raise, I agree with, because I think that what's underpinning the whole SEND strategy, the consultation, the direction of travel, including the graduated response, is a cultural change across our school system in terms of embracing inclusion. And the graduated response is one way, practically, that we are trying to hold schools to account, I suppose, in relation to becoming more inclusive. Having said that, we've got some fantastic examples in many of our schools, primary and secondary, of inclusive practice, and of schools working really hard and really creatively through quality teaching, which is the first element of the graduated response, using their notional funding, but also thinking about how they might want to use some of the funding that's available from the panels to try and really support children in mainstream settings. I think we've done an awful lot of training as well with our schools as part of the graduated response. It isn't just a case of, rolling it out via the intranet. We've been engaging schools, we've been talking to schools, we've been training schools on the process. And my understanding from talking to the individuals who've been involved in coordinating the training is the engagement has been really good, actually, and the schools are buying into this. But of course, we need to see what impact this makes in terms of requests from schools for assessment, how it links through to exclusion, all those things that you've talked about, which are going to be important going forward.
Eldrick?
Yes, I think, in principle, having a graduated response strategy and, again, promoting inclusion and supporting schools is absolutely the right way to go. I just think, again, we have to face the reality of the situation in schools, and that £23 million worth of notional funding, which is in the system in primary and secondary schools, we would like to think, and in an ideal world, that all of that money is being dedicated to young people with SEND and is being spent in that way. But the reality is, we'll probably find that a lot of that money is being used to prop up school budgets. We have a national funding crisis in education. Schools can't afford to buy books. And so what my worry is, and I couldn't get a clear answer again at scrutiny last night, is what this is going to do to schools' budgets if suddenly they're going to be expected to account for that money in their budget as money to support SEND, and they won't be able to use that money to prop up their existing budgets. I'm not saying they should be using that money to prop up their existing budgets, and in an ideal world they wouldn't have to do that, but the reality is we have a national crisis in funding in education and there isn't enough money in the system, and schools are pretty desperate under some circumstances. I think the other thing is that we can't, much as we can request and we can cajole and we can advise and we can work alongside schools to get them to account for their notional funding and account for how that's going to be spent, we can't compel them. We can't compel local authority schools, we can't compel maintained schools, let alone academies, to do it. We can have lovely conversations with the Regional Schools Commissioner and we can do all this work, but at the end of the day, if they're not prepared to do it or they can't do it, they won't do it. So not only could we have a situation where this proposal pushes schools into deficit and causes them financial difficulties, but you also could end up in a situation whereby schools just don't account for that money, and we have no recourse if that is the case. I think also, let's be clear that we were told at scrutiny last night, again, that the graduated response strategy applies to early years as well, but we're also told that early years settings don't get any notional funding, so how it would apply to early years settings, I don't know. And also it's unclear from the proposals and from questions that were asked at scrutiny last night whether or not early years settings will still be able to access locality funding, or whether or not that will be lumped in with the early years inclusion fund. So there is a lot of, again, in early years, a lot of questions around the provision. And also, what is not clear from this is that regardless of a graduated response strategy and regardless of whether or not we say this is when an EHCP assessment takes place and we make that decision as to whether or not it's appropriate, every parent has the right to request an EHCP assessment for their child if they want to have an assessment. And that is not written into this pathway, it's not written into this flowchart. And where that sits in terms of this process, again, I don't feel like we got a good enough response at scrutiny last night, that parents can completely circumvent this process should they choose to, because they have the right under the Children and Families Act to request an assessment and not have to go through a graduated response strategy, a graduated response process at all. So I just think there are things that we need to be realistic about, although in principle, again, the idea that we promote quality teaching and inclusion is absolutely the right way to go as far as I'm concerned, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Eldred. Councillor Williams?
Thank you very much. A couple of points there. First of all, the graduated response here, it is for schools, and parents at any point, as Councillor Eldred can say, can actually request an EHCP. This actual document is to give that guidance to schools. In terms of can we force schools to do this? Again, Councillor Eldred is right. We cannot force schools to do this. However, it is a starting point. And my challenge back would be to say, yes, we cannot force them, but we need to try. The alternative is to leave it for another 30 years and not review it. But I'm not prepared to do that. I think we have to have a starting point. I believe this is the right starting point to give the guidance and support to schools, but also to give the support to parents so that they can challenge schools and they can hold the schools to account. I think that's really important. And Lucy, in terms of, again, what schools might or might not do in terms of their budgets, etc. One of the things that the Minister of Education, Damien Hines, has said is that he understands some of these issues now and has started discussions with Ofsted to change their framework to include SEND issues, and he's having that discussion now, and we will be continuing to lobby government on that, because actually I think that is really important. I believe that schools should not be able to be good or outstanding if they do not take into consideration the needs of their SEND pupils. And what really we're trying to do with all of this is to say to schools, you must try, you must demonstrate, show us what you have done to help support children with SEND. Now, if they cannot, as Lucy gave an example, if they cannot support the child and they cannot help the child to progress and to be safe, of course, you then move on to the next stage. And of course, we will help challenge the schools on behalf of the parents and the children, but we will also help support the schools if they cannot do what is required, and we will see if we can make the provision elsewhere. I think we've got to start somewhere, and I do believe this is the right way to start.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any other contributions? Councillor Ralston?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch on a couple of bits that was mentioned by Lucy there, and I think I wanted to go into a little bit of a bit of part of an email I sent recently and then give an example as to why. As a parent, I wanted nothing more than my children to attend a local primary school. I believe that social interaction with their peers greatly helps with their communication skills and building community-minded individuals. I believe a diverse school population also encourages neurotypical children to be more accepting and understanding of different disabilities. However, I also accept that some children will never manage a mainstream setting and to ensure appropriate facilities are available for them, this realignment of specialist placements and enhanced resource provisions is critical. I want to give an example of that really, because you talk about children being different and they're being isolated or they're being put out for the other people. And I think it's very clear that, do you know what, it's not to be feared. Being different isn't a fear. These children are different. We're all different. And they are people that need that little bit of extra help. And I think, you know, we should embrace it, because I've seen it happen in two ways. I've seen it where a school hasn't supported, has given or has isolated and done that sort of thing, and it has a massive impact, and the children do see them as being scary or different and not treated appropriately. And I've seen it where a little boy who was at that particular school was not accessible, could not engage with other children, could not manage any kind of social interaction, and was not fit to do his assessments before he went to a different school. He then went went to that school, and within 6 months, with the right support, not with an educational healthcare plan at that point, but the school took him on. They gave him the right support. They talked to his peers. They engaged with him. That child became a school counsellor. He excelled in his maths. He sat all his exams. He's very, very clever little boy, and now he's one of the most popular little kids in his class. And that was my son. And the difference wasn't monetary. It wasn't about they needed X, Y, and Z. They just needed to be treated differently because they are different. And this little thing he couldn't manage, whilst he was in overload, he couldn't manage to go in and sit and eat his dinner in a busy dinner hall. So he sat quietly in a little environment, unsupervised, not an issue. He was happy, he's in the school. It cost nothing to do that, but it set him up for the rest of the day. And it's about making those reasonable adjustments, identifying those issues and supporting those children. And I think that's the biggest message from me, is that we need a line in the sand, and this is what this does. It draws a line in the sand, but every child is different and every child can be supported to be the best that they can be. Thank you.
Thank you. So the Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to note the report. Cabinet's being asked to agree recommendations 2.1 to 2.2. All agreed? Thank you. Okay. Item 12, Children Missing Education CME Policy Update. Again, Mr. Smith.
Chair. So this Cabinet report is to formally update the Council's policy on children missing education, which is attached to Appendix 2. The policy has been updated to include specific issues in relation to reduced timetables and for children and young people subject to SEND. This brings the policy up to date and makes it more robust. Just wanted to point out at 4.6 in the report, it can be seen that Ofsted were very assured during our inspection last year about Derby's process for how it manages and responds to children who go missing from school or who are electively home educated. So Cabinet are asked to agree the recommendations at 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you. Are there any contributions, Councillor Kerr?
It's just a quick question, and it comes back to children who are out of school and in theory electively home educating, but whose parents would actually like to find a suitable school place for that child. And whether, you know, I've dealt with a number of parents who have been in that position, and some of them feel that there is nothing they can do to get the council to listen to their concerns, and therefore home educating is the only solution. But that is not what the solution that they would actually like for their child. And it's whether we have some way of monitoring that and recognising that it is a failure on our part and making sure that we are doing something that in future can resolve it.
Andy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The issue around elective home education and the routes into EHE are quite complicated. We have introduced a more systematic process this term whereby schools have signed up to reporting in systematically to the local authority the reasons behind parents choosing to electively home educate. The duties on the local authority are very limited and are governed by legislation that goes back to the 1940s in terms of the statutory responsibilities that we have, which are very limited. The reasons why parents choose to electively home educated are wide and varied. And we are seeing an increase in electively home educated children in Derby, as most authorities are. And there's currently some research that's been commissioned by the DFE trying to understand the rationale and reason for that. Certainly in terms of parents who, for whatever reason, feel that schools are not meeting their needs, or they feel that they're not being identify with the school of their choice, I think our advice to those parents would always be to talk to the admission service, to appeal, certainly if they've applied for a school place and they haven't got their school of choice, and to speak to the relevant officers to try and work that forward. But I think, you know, that there's also sometimes a philosophy that underpins the choices around elective home education. And I think also we need to make sure that we are holding schools to account as well in terms of some of the reasons that might underpin that, which is why we want to try and track some of the rationale in a more robust way.
Thank you for that. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I think one of the other things that we would really like to reiterate is that in Derby, we never give up on trying to find and locate a child. And that is to say that in some circumstances, other authorities may make the effort to try and find them, but after a certain amount of time we'll say we can't find them and actually put that case aside. We never do that in Derby, and we will continue to never do that. So what I hope you can accept these recommendations. The executive scrutiny recommendation was to note the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further contributions? No? Okay, so Cabinet's being asked to agree recommendations 2.1, 2.2. Are we agreed? Thank you. Okay. Item 13, Emotional Health and Wellbeing Service for Children in Care, Leaving Care and Adopted. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Chair. This is a positive paper since it's seeking, following a successful pilot, which is called a proof of concept in the report, but it's a pilot, which was carried out jointly between the Council and the Clinical Commissioning Group of our Emotional Health and Wellbeing Service for Children in Care. The outcomes from the pilot have been really positive. We've seen improved placement stability for children in care and indications of better emotional health and a more equitable offer for children who are in care. We've also had really good feedback from staff, from carers and from service users as well. The paper proposes to go out and tender a joint funded emotional health and wellbeing service with the CCG to commence from the 1st of April 2019, following expiration of the current agreement. So following successful procurement, the contract will be managed collaboratively with the CCG. So the Cabinet are asked to agree recommendations 2.1 to 2.6.
Councillor Williams.
A very appropriate day to have this report, being World Mental Health Day. So I'm very pleased with this report, and I would say there's also been some announcements today from government about funding for schools and mental health. And again, I'd like to take the opportunity to also thank not only our providers and partners here, but also to thank the Opportunity Area Board, who again are looking at mental health within school settings. So this is a really welcome report. In terms of what the executive scrutiny recommended, if I may, Chair, if that's okay with you to continue on that. The Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to recommend that Council Cabinet identify as a matter of urgency a potential alternative building to allow the service to be delivered as soon as possible, as a provider had been identified. And of course I agree with this, but it does have to be done as part of the tender process. My priority is to ensure that the eventual site for the recommissioned service is the right setting and configuration for children and young people undergoing therapy. And I'm confident that during the procurement process we'll be able to work and identify a suitable building. So I would ask my colleagues on the Cabinet to actually note the scrutiny recommendations, but that we have to go through the proper tender process. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr.
Can I just say I'm really pleased that the pilot has been so successful, because it's intuitively, if you give people help sooner, you'd expect it to, and clearly it is. We had a report to Health and Wellbeing Board, I think it was last month, and it stated that we are exceeding our support for young people with mental health issues, and we're not delivering to 1 in 4, but to 1 in 3 within a certain time period. 1 in 3. 2 out of 3 children apart from this exclusive group who are desperately in need of it, and thankfully we're doing something with them, but we've still got 2 out of 3 other children within the city who aren't getting the help they need in a timely manner. So maybe this extra funding to schools will help do something, but I suspect that we've got a very big hole to fill. And if issues aren't addressed sooner, I think that they tend to grow like potholes. And we need to, sinkholes. And we need to do everything we can to help that for everybody.
Thank you. Councillor Eldrick.
I think, absolutely we welcome this, and I think it's a brilliant service and has massively changed the experience for children in care in terms of accessing services, and the number of children who've been able to access is brilliant. I just have to say, though, that it seems rather unfortunate to me that on World Mental Health Day, that this government has felt the need to appoint a suicide prevention minister for the first time in the history of this country. And I'd suggest that they probably wouldn't need a suicide prevention minister if their austerity programme wasn't so bloody awful, and if universal credit wasn't so awful, and they weren't plunging people into poverty with almost everything that they do. But, that's World Mental Health Day.
Chair, if I may, as the mental health champion for the city, I think it's really disgusting that you bring in politics into this. In terms of mental health, has a massive impact on anybody, and it can be from anything. Yes, of course, money worries, but it can be emotional anxiety, stress, everything else. It's a bigger issue across the country, and to start politicising it and start playing silly political games when we have got crisis out there of mental health, and by saying these silly things, it just eradicates the importance of something like today.
With respect, Chair, it wasn't a silly thing to say. Actually, levels of crisis and mental health have massively increased under this government, and that is why your government has felt the need to appoint this minister. That's not political gameplay. That is pure fact.
As chair,
the government did it because yours didn't.
As chair, I think we need to draw this debate to a conclusion. I support what you've said, Councillor Wilson. I think that's a valid argument back to Councillor Eldrick's contribution there at the end, which was probably unnecessary. I think we can probably agree to. Cabinet is being asked to agree to recommendations 2.1 to 2.6. As Councillor Williams has already said, the scrutiny recommendations are noted. All of those in favour? Thank you. Okay, Council Cabinet is now going to look at item 14, which is Children's Residential Homes Proposed Reconfiguration of Service Provision. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this paper is for Cabinet to agree a two-phased approach to the reconfiguration of our in-house children's homes. Phase 1 is a new model of delivery resulting in 2 hubs created to provide up to 26 beds, and Phase 2 will develop a pathway and access to a range of semi-independence provision for our children in care aged 16 to 18 to better enable the development of independent skills required for leaving care. The proposals have been informed by an updated strategic needs assessment, which concludes that we're looking after children with much greater needs in our children's homes than we were 5 years ago when we embarked on a substantial refurbishment programme. A targeted consultation has been carried out with a range of stakeholders on the proposals, and there was broad support for the recommendations, and Cabinet are asked to agree the recommendations 2.1 to 2.4.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much. And again, we did have a very detailed discussion last night at Scrutiny, and again, thanks Scrutiny for allowing us to talk there. Scrutiny Board did make a recommendation, and again, Chair, with your permission, if I can go over that recommendation and mine to Cabinet. The Scrutiny Board resolved to recommend to Council Cabinet that there should be no overall reduction in the number of mainstream beds. That's the first recommendation. What I would say is that the rationale for informing the number and configuration of beds has been undertaken carefully and informed by an updated needs assessment and the range of issues and occupancy rates the service has been dealing with. Phase 2 of the programme will address the issue and ensure there is an overall future increase in the number of internal placements for our looked after children. This is because we are working with Derby Homes to secure a number of small homes, and these will be targeted to young people in our existing homes to enable successful and quicker move from Hub 1 or 2 into semi-independent living. By doing this, we will be able to release capacity more quickly. This approach is also in line with what our care leavers have told us that they would have liked to have had for them and they would like in the future. So I would ask Cabinet not to accept that recommendation. And then the second recommendation was to recommend that Council Cabinet should seek to potentially increase the number of bed spaces, enabling those on external placements to be brought back into the city and enabling the Council to sell surplus bed spaces. The presented strategy will enable external places to be brought back to the city where appropriate. Future bed spaces is covered by the recommendation in 2.4, as in the Council agrees to a future review of properties within the Council's portfolio. The Council agrees to a future review to consider if any additional bed spaces are required in the future, but it's really important that we implement the current recommendations first, so I would not support this recommendation. And then the third recommendation is, in the event that the recommendations detailed in the report do go ahead, to recommend to Council Cabinet that it ensures local ward councillors are consulted and involved in any decisions relating to what happens to those buildings. I'm happy to agree this recommendation, and it's something that I would seek to do anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Mr Youth-Mayor.
Right, thank you, Chair. This report is really second only to the financial reports presented by... sorry, just quite stuck. Okay, that is really saying something about the care and consideration officers have put it to this, and having gotten first-hand a first-hand response to this from a young person in external care. Shout out to him for helping me gain a better understanding on this and being a great sport even when I asked him really heavy hitting questions. I must say to councillors to please allow this young person to return to Derby and provide him with our outstanding care. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any more contributions? Okay, so just to recap on Councillor Williams in regards to the Executive Scrutiny Board. So I'm going to be asking Cabinet that we don't accept recommendation number 1 or 2. However, we will accept recommendation 3. Is that correct, Councillor Williams? Okay, that's the recommendation, and we are being asked to agree recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. I believe that's the end of the agenda. Thank you very much for your attendance and your contributions.